So, if you're a European business right now, you've got to be asking yourself a pretty tough question. In a world of inflation, stagnation, and just fierce competition, where on earth can you find real, sustainable growth? Well, let's get into it, because the answer might just be an ocean away. This quote from diplomat Wolfgang Ischinger, it really gets to the heart of the challenge. I mean, there's a comfort in tradition, right, in doing what's always worked. But what happens when that comfort turns into complacency? What happens when the world zigs and you just don't? And look, this isn't just some abstract philosophical idea. This whole love affair with the status quo had massive real world consequences for one of Europe's most powerful industries. It basically left the door wide open for an outsider to come in and completely rewrite the rules. Which brings us right to our first section, the incredible story of how the titans of the European auto world found themselves scrambling to catch up to a scrappy newcomer from California. Okay, so what's so fascinating here is how it just lays the two strategies bare. On one side, you've got the established European giants. We're talking Mercedes, BMW, Audi, feeling pretty secure, maybe a little too secure, with their amazing combustion engines. But on the other side, you have Tesla, just relentlessly pushing electric innovation because they saw something critical. Customers didn't just want a car anymore. They wanted a computer on wheels. The Europeans stood still, and Tesla adapted. Simple as that. And this is a perfect illustration of how one bad call can create a domino effect of problems. So now they're not only playing catch up on the tech, but they're also stuck with a flawed strategy. They don't have enough manufacturing capacity in America, which means they're shipping cars across the Atlantic, and that is crazy expensive. And as if that weren't enough, just as they're trying to pivot, a whole new wave of heavily subsidized Chinese electric vehicles is flooding the market. It's just a perfect storm. All right, let's zoom out for a minute because this whole thing isn't just about cars. The struggles in the auto industry are really a symptom of a much bigger economic problem that's facing the entire continent. You see, for over a decade, Europe's economy was humming along on a model of cheap inputs. We're talking cheap Russian energy, cheap raw materials from all over the world, and an environment of practically zero interest rates. Well, that whole era is over. Done. Inflation has slammed the door shut, but the European Central Bank is really in a bind. If they hike rates too fast to fight inflation, they could trigger a debt crisis in some of the member countries. And on top of all that, with energy costs through the roof and supply chains all messed up, the big industrial engines of the continent, Germany and France, their economies aren't just slowing down, they're actually starting to shrink. So, with all of these storm clouds gathering, you have to ask, right? What's Europe's ace in the hole? What does it still have that gives it a real competitive edge on the world stage? The answer is actually really simple and it's powerful. Quality. That made in Germany, made in France, made in Switzerland label. It still means something big. It's a global seal of approval for excellence, for precision, for real value. But here's the catch, and it's a huge one. Having the absolute best product in the world doesn't do you any good if rising costs for shipping, energy, and materials make it so expensive that no one can actually afford to buy it. Quality can't win if you're priced out of the game, and that right there is the fundamental problem. And all of this leads to a pivotal moment, a real turning point, where businesses have to take a hard look in the mirror and ask a very, very direct question about what they want for their future. I mean, it really boils down to this. Are you satisfied with the status quo, with just managing decline in a market that's shrinking? Or do you want more? Do you want to actually grow? Because if that answer is yes, then just sticking to the old playbook isn't going to cut it. It's time to get real, to evaluate the situation honestly, and to start looking for a brand new path. And as we're about to see, that path, it might just lead west. So let's talk about this idea of an American soft landing. Why is the US market not just another box to check, but maybe the most logical, most natural place for European brands that are looking to expand? Well, the deck is already kind of stacked in your favor. First off, American consumers are basically pre-sold on the idea of European quality. Second, America is a nation of immigrants, so there are these deep, historical, cultural ties to Europe that are still really strong. Third, the language of business is English, which just removes a massive headache. And finally, there's a fundamental alignment on social and political values, and that creates a way more stable and predictable place to do business. This is honestly one of my favorite little stories from the new book. An American friend of the author's swore that a random baguette he bought at a gas station in France was better than any fancy bread he could get in the US. It's a funny line, but it perfectly captures this almost mythical view Americans have of European quality, even in the simplest things. And this fascination, it gets reinforced all the time. Just think about it. From all the Disney fairy tale castles that look suspiciously like they're from Germany, to the obsession with movies like The Sound of Music, American pop culture is constantly selling this romantic, idealized version of Europe. And what that does is create an incredibly warm and receptive audience for European products. Okay, let's pull all these threads together because we need to start framing this not as some risky jump into the unknown, but as the most logical, most sensible next step for any European company that actually wants to grow. When you lay it out step by step like this, the logic is pretty hard to argue with. Step 1, you make a great product. We know that. Step 2, your home market is struggling. Step 3, there's this huge market an ocean away that already wants what you sell. And step 4, that market is stable, it's pro-growth, and it shares your values. The conclusion pretty much writes itself, doesn't it? And when you stack the US up against other potential growth markets, the choice becomes even clearer. Doing business in America means you're working in a system that generally shares European values on things like sustainability and human rights. Now, contrast that with the risks and the value clashes you might face in emerging markets like the BRICS nations. That's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The US really represents a path of stability versus a patch of significant and often unpredictable risk. So here it is, the bottom line. We have to reframe how we think about this. Expanding to America isn't the risky move. In today's economic climate, standing still is the risky move. Going to the US market is actually a way to reduce your risk. It is the safer, more sensible path to finding the growth that has simply vanished back home. Which leaves us all with one final thought to chew on. For European companies trying to find their way in a world full of uncertainty, could it be that the surest, most direct road to a prosperous future doesn't run through Brussels or Berlin, but leads straight to America?